we've all just seen episode 1. Do you want to launch us off by telling us what drew you to the project, Luke?
Me, okay. I mean, for me, first and foremost, it was the script. It was Billy's script. As soon as I read it, I knew it was special. You know, I'd never read anything like it before. A big part of it for me was BSL, was the deaf element, and also to see a story from the point of view of a deaf person. I'd seen other film shows with deaf characters in, but there were never that many deaf characters, and often it seemed like the point of view was from a hearing person's perspective. So when I read this script, I just was immersed in the world and in from Brennan's point of view, you know, and all of the other deaf characters, and I just thought it was really special. And then when I met Billy, that sealed it for me, and we had an amazing chat with Marley, Billy's dog, who's the cutest thing ever. And yeah, so that was it for me.
Well, that links us in nicely to William. Why did you write this? Where did it come from?
Why did I write this? Okay, I'm asking myself that very question. Let's see, why did I do this? I think I was in my time of the life where I was questioning a lot of things. What does it mean to be deaf? All those big questions you ask yourself. I wrote it for myself. This script was my fuck you script. I wrote it for myself, to myself. I didn't care who read it. I just wanted to write something that I would want to watch. But what was funny is the first draft was just a deaf man on his own with a gun, going round shooting people. And I talked to my wife about it, and she said, yeah, that sounds great. It just sounds like wish fulfillment. I mean, why don't you add a little bit more to it? So props to my wife, thank you, my biggest and best critic. But actually, that point was true. Why don't we introduce a daughter to it? Why does it always have to be about the guy? What is it about guys like him? And it's about the character of Carly joining Reunion. So thank you so much to Kathy, my wife. Thank you for being my first script editor. So I just worked on the script for myself. It was for me. And it was that thing where you write something that you're proud of and you think, well, no one's going to read it. It doesn't matter. And then that script got passed around. And it ended up with Joe Sims, who is also our actor within Reunion. And Joe passed it on to his partner, Gwen, who just happened to work for Warp Films. And it was passed on to Mark, who read it. And it was that thing when you write something for yourself, and then the more people that read it and like it, the more scared you become. And you think, oh my God, this is a lot of attention. Let me hand over to you, Mark. You tell your part of your story.
Well, again, just thanks to Gwen, who just started for the other EP, Gwen Gorst, who brought it into Warp. It was amazing, really, because Gwen had sent it, and William I don't think you had an agent at the time. I think you were, a new writer, and she said,
no agent.
She said, you have to read this script, and Gwen knew me by then, that give me a script just before I get on a train, because that's the only time I concentrate. And I live in Sheffield, and I read it, I started to read it, and by the time I got to Leicester, I'd texted Gwen to say, we have to do this script. It is just the most incredible thrill ride. And for me, it was a great thriller. I mean, it was a great story, a great thriller. But then I'd never seen a deaf character be represented like that. And also, I'd say, after an hour, I was thinking about what would it be like for this man in prison, and all of this. It was another layer of detail, and I just like literally said to Gwen, and it was like, we have to do this. Let's option it now. I think by the time I got off the train in Sheffield, my business affairs team had said we've got to option it, and it's just thanks to Billy's writing, and then we started the journey with the BBC, which was because this was the first episode, and the BBC got on board and worked tirelessly with Siobhan at Warp and Gwen and Joe, who introduced it with Alice, and it was just seeing it all come together was incredible. And Billy's from Sheffield. This was a bit of a love letter to Sheffield as well, I think.
I love that. I should say as well, we're filming this for the BFI archive, so I love that we've started with an F-bomb and a deaf man with a gun. If they're not in now, when will they be? Just coming back to, so that was the origin of the project, and then obviously when filming, you were working on this bilingual set. What was that like for all of you?
Shall I take this one to start with? For me, I have to say, the first day I arrived on set, it was like my brain just broke. It was so weird to see so many people all just doing their jobs. There was about 100 people on location, all these moving parts, and it really felt different to previous things that I've been on, to previous shoots. Everyone genuinely wanted to be a part of this. They wanted to make this. And it was great. It's really hard for me to just sit here now, because in the back of my head, I still don't believe that this is actually happening. I honestly, when we got the green light, 3 years ago, I thought, well, this isn't real, this is a wind-up, isn't it? Even now, here I sit, it still feels surreal. It's just wonderful, yeah. So that's how I feel. And honestly, but yeah, you talked about the first day on set, didn't you? For everybody just getting involved and wanting to make this as good as it possibly could be.
Well, it is real, I promise. I'll pitch you later. And what was it like for the two of you? Because as a deaf person myself, I actually got to come on set and see what it was like. And it was a completely unique experience for me as a deaf actor as well. So what was it like for the two of you as hearing people?
I mean, what was great, because Billy was, we set off straight away that we had to make this as inclusive as possible, as, in terms of hearing actors and deaf crew and hearing crew. And I not computed how it would work. And got to say that it's like, thanks to the BBC, who really just gave us that extra bit of money, so there was never that thing as a producer, your budget is squeezed all the time, but there was never a conversation which was, we're going to trim the interpreters. We never had a conversation where Luke said, can we swap an interpreter for a helicopter? Because we could have
had that conversation.
We could have had that. Okay.
I didn't know that was a swap.
That seems a bit unbalanced. Really.
But there is literally, as you know, everyone's when you're on the screen, and there was a sacrosanct rule that this had to be the way it was, and we stuck to it. And thanks to Helen, our brilliant producer, and Lee, we just that was a rule. And thanks to the BBC for giving us that extra bit of money, which meant that never became an issue. But I went to the first day on set, and I was just amazed by it all. It blew my mind to watch it work, because you're thinking, is this actually going to work?
Yeah.
And then when you're seeing all these people communicating, deaf hearing, and just this seamless from action to cut, it was just great. And thanks, and Luke ashamed us all by, but he's like picked up sign language in next to no time.
Yeah, I mean, for me, first and foremost, it was like a lot of time in prep, figuring out the logistics of how everything was going to work, mainly communication, making sure that all of the deaf crew could contribute in the way, in the correct way, and that the mix of the hearing and deaf crew was going to be able to communicate with each other. And that, for me, is all about the interpreters. The interpreters were absolutely amazing. And also, again, thanks to the BBC and Warp as well, because there was a number of interpreters. Often you don't find enough interpreters, but on this there were enough, so that's one of the reasons why I think it was so smooth. And also, the other thing we did is we had a whisper track for hearing people that couldn't understand sign, so any hearing person could pick up a set of cans and get a live translation of the sign language that was being acted on screen, for example. And if they were talking to a crew member, they would have an interpreter with them. I think for the most part, we just tried really hard to keep that fluidity of communication, and it worked, as you say. It worked, and it was really amazing. And I think we couldn't have made this show in any other way. We needed that. We needed the contribution from the deaf crew and obviously the deaf cast. We were all passionate about that. It came from Billy, and then we just were all immediately passionate about making sure we got it right, essentially. Yeah.
And one thing to add about Luke is he went and started learning sign language. So, I mean, you just rolled up your sleeves and you did it. And for me, one thing I just loved was you were usually in the pub with the deaf actors, with the deaf crew at the end of every filming day. And you were trying your best to sign with them, directly to them. And I think everyone really appreciated that from you. You were doing what you could, and you knew that you would keep on learning. So Luke's attitude from day one was, I am learning, I will do everything I can do as well to be a part of this deaf world and understand it the best that you could. And I think sometimes it was difficult for Luke, because he obviously, you're balancing up the schedule, because it was a tight schedule. That, we were filming, obviously, long hours every day. And Duffy, our sign language coach as well, who's here. Hi. It's always that kind of the one more and the chance that, Duffy said, can we go for another take? And obviously you having to work out whether you can or whether you didn't have time or not. But also, as I can see Duffy here, I do need to put, props to you as well. Thank you for your big role that you played in this.
Thank you. Just to add to what Billy was saying, just really quickly, for me, it was a kind of no-brainer. At the beginning of the process, I thought long and hard about the fact that I was a hearing director. I'd spoken to Billy at length, and Billy had kind of really made it clear that, not aside from his sort of cinematic vision for the show, which is exactly how I felt, it was a bilingual show with a hearing cast and a deaf cast and a deaf crew and hearing crew. And so I felt, when I understood that properly, I felt like I could really help and try and bring this to the screen and contribute. But I felt personally that I needed to immediately, as you say, roll my sleeves up and just try. I just wanted to meet the deaf cast and crew halfway, basically. And that transformed my understanding of it. I also felt a real responsibility to get this right for a deaf audience. I felt like I needed to immerse myself in deaf culture, in sign language. And being at the pub is a huge part of deaf culture, and it's like, well, it's a lot easier to sign when you've had like 3 Guinness as well. But Guinness, the sign for Guinness for it's a pre-scholar. So that was part of it for me, was like taking on that challenge and responsibility, and just basically attacking it and doing everything I could. But then it felt really good to be able to, walk up to Matty and direct him in sign language, and because I wanted to have that relationship with all of the cast. I do that with the hearing cast, and being able to sign to Rose across the room, you're on fire or whatever, like just little kind of things that allowed me to have the same relationship with the deaf cast that I had with the hearing cast, and the same with the deaf crew and the hearing crew. So yeah.
And I think it was Rose Ayling-Ellis, who I'll speak to later, who said in her Edinburgh TV Festival speech that, as deaf people, we can't learn to hear, but you can learn to sign. So, I agree. Yeah, round of applause for that. Also, I've heard that there's a funny story to do with your sign name. Do you want to tell us about it?
Basically, when I first started learning, I was obviously getting a lot wrong. I was just trying my best, and I was going up to Matty a lot, and I was being like, really nice, like, take. We're gonna, we'll have one more, but next time maybe just a little bit more emotion. And I don't know where I got this from, but I was signing emotion like I guess it's a single tear or something. But like, it's not sign language, it's not BSL at all. That's sad and that's emotion, and I'm doing this. And every time I walk away, Matty's turning to Duffy and being like, what is he on about? Like, what's all this about? What does he want? And so anyway, me, Matty and Duffy all went to Fagan's, which Mark is, one of the co-owners of Fagan's, and that was a huge part of this process, is going to the pub with everyone, and just everyone, deaf and hearing, just really. And so it was just me, Matty and Duffy, no interpreter, so I was clinging on for dear life in the pub with my sign, and they told me, like, okay, you've been waiting for this, you're going to get your sign name. And so my sign name is Luke, which is the single tier. But also the best part of it is that is the sign for wrong. So my sign name is literally wrong. Yeah. So yeah.
Very filmic, though, the single tier.
No, but actually also, just to say as well, thanks to Duffy and Matty, and I did feel really honoured to get a sign name. It's a huge part of deaf culture, and for me to get one, I really felt like, that I was kind of accepted into the deaf community, and it felt good. So yeah.
Mine is this, which is funny, so no pressure. Just going back to the script, and there's a lot of access kind of woven in there. We see that the interpreter wasn't booked in the first episode, and we see more about kind of prison and the deaf experience in prison as the series goes on. Was that an important part of the script for you to weave that in at the beginning?
I think what's interesting about those parts of it and the story, when you see there wasn't an interpreter, there was no access. For deaf people, That's just normal, isn't it? That's just a part of our everyday lives. For hearing people, it's heart-wrenching. It's oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. But for deaf people, it's just like, that is our normality. And it's kind of funny because we talk about interpreters not being booked. And that happened to me literally the other day. They just say, you rock up and they say there's no interpreter. And that is just what happens quite regularly. So the word access, I probably wouldn't use it in those terms. I just say I've shown day-to-day life. I've tried to write the reality, which is probably quite boring for deaf people because we're like, and sometimes you have a shit time and sometimes people forget to do things for you. But the one rule that I did have was I refused to write the magic deaf people. In those scenes where a deaf person magically lip reads something from a million miles away. The reality is we don't understand things and communication breaks down all the time. And one thing that I do love, and I'm kind of stealing as well from Eddie as well, saying that Reunion is about communication, because Eddie, you said this, as an actor in part of this, everybody in this has a problem communicating their truth and the honesty, whether they're deaf or hearing, they all have a communication problem. And I just think that's brilliant. And I only realised that, as I'm watching it, and I realised that it's brilliant when you have, it's the only times when two deaf people are signing to one another, they're the only time that's having real communication. And I think there's a really nice underlying message there. So if you just let deaf people get on with it, they're fine. It's hearing people getting in the way and messing shit up.
I remember I was having a cesarean and there was no lip speaker available, and I was like, what's going on? A baby came out, a spoiler. But I can relate. And with this kind of access, and you mentioned the theme of communication, which is obviously huge, and there's a trauma there as well that we'll see more of as the series goes on. I've seen it all, did I mention? How did you kind of explore the themes of that in the way you filmed it, Luke, and also in the way you approached it, Mark, from a production perspective?
Luke did the most incredible detailed storyboards. And I mean, again, love letter to Sheffield. Sheffield's a great place to film. It's got this, and I love the fact. I think we said quite early on it was a western. It felt like it was going to be an urban western, and I think that's from the way it's shot. Matty coming back into town, this kind of classic.
And
sort
Richard
of,
Hawley
doing
and
Richard.
Hawley nailed it.
We
just said Sheffield Western basically, and then he went off and did that.
He literally only a few weeks ago.
So he did the intro and the outro music,
so we've
kind of theme tune.
Worked with Richard from Dead Man Shoes days. We worked together, and Luke was a huge fan, and we just asked him if he'd be interested in doing the soundtrack, and he came to set. He was in Fagan's a lot. That's kind of quite common for Hawley, but he came and he met.
There's definitely a pub.
There's a pub thing, yes.
Vibe
Guinness, lots of Guinness, and but Matty, he met Matty, he saw Matty act. And he was blown away with just watching it. And he came into the Warp offices just before Christmas. And we showed him a little, he knew the story, I told him that, but he watched a 10-minute cut, as in a little assembly of the whole thing. And he went outside for a fag. And he came back in and he went, I've got it. And he picked his guitar up and he sang that song. No one to sign my name in front of me and Luke.
Incredible,
and we went. And then he said, and then he kind of had the chord, he had that sort of class, the hook that you see, and then he went, give me till tomorrow. And then I went to bed, went to sleep, and I woke up and I got a message, and he'd done the song, and he'd sent me a thing, and it was like, and he nailed it, and so I think that Western was a big theme for
Yeah, definitely the Western thing, and I think Jeremy, who's here, the composer as well, like his music is incredible and does a lot to underline that as well. But and actually also to say on the music as well that the BBC were great as well, because there was a real journey there, I think, and the show, for me, there's a noir element to it. It's like a neo-noir Western thing, and a lot of it's about Sheffield. We see Sheffield on screen and it's big, and it's like the contrast of the urban locations and then the big countryside stuff. And the landscape, which can be really, any of the crew here will tell you, like, really physically, demanding of you and the weather's constantly changing. But, to go back to what you said about the trauma thing, I think that for me was really interesting, because me and Billy were talking about it early on about flashbacks, and you see some of those fragmented images in the show in the first episode, and as the 4 goes on, Billy, like, beautifully wrote in that structure, and we have, like, third-person flashbacks like the prison, which are more recent, but they're these deep, recessed memories in Brennan's mind that are fractured, and they're fragments of what he can remember, and he can't quite piece them together, and they're not in order. And throughout the show, he begins to communicate, which is, as Billy had said and Eddie had mentioned before, is a big theme in the show. And the moment that he begins to communicate and talk to people and reach out about these things that he's remembering and his trauma, his traumatic experience that he went through when he was younger, the fragments start to order themselves and become more linear. So like we, the audience, and he begins to understand what happened to him and why, and maybe why everything kind of happened. So for me, that's a really powerful part of the show, because I think as an idea, that's really strong, you know, the idea of that we can, if we just talk or communicate or sign with each other, that actually maybe it won't be as bad as it is if we just keep it all in here. And actually Matty, there's a great piece where Matty signs at the end of the show, Brennan says he kept it all inside and it builds up and builds up and builds up like poison. And that's kind of, you know, again, Billy's beautiful writing kind of summarising it all in that one line.
And one thing to mention about you, Luke, sorry, sign name, there it is again in public, is you joined around, January, February, and it was interesting because around that time, I feel like we're hitting a bit of the wall with the script as well. We had a good script, but it was missing something. And I remember the meeting when you came in, and we were reading through it together, and it just felt like kind of, you know, it was like the drug that we all needed in that moment. It was those ideas. It was the visuality of it all as well. And some things that you were telling me to do, I was like, oh, really? You want to film some kind of liquid dropping off a chair or a table? You're talking about a surface. You're talking about, but you had a clear idea of how the flashbacks could work and how those fragments would start to reveal that bigger picture. And I was so glad you came and did that, though, because you gave us all the extra push.
Well, what you created together is stunning, as I think we'll all agree. I want to make sure we have time for a couple of questions that we've had in before we speak to the brilliant cast. So this is from Serena Abrahams. She says, Luke and Mark, what research did you carry out before making Reunion? And Billy, did you do any research while you were writing it?
Okay, I wrote about my lived experience. I spoke to a few social workers who've worked with deaf people, particularly in prison. They gave me a lot of kind of good examples and their anecdotes and stories. But also, more than anything, it was this huge document. It's like a 300-page document, and it was about deaf people in prison. And there are so many things in Reunion that are genuinely taken from those examples in the report. So Brennan can't hear the tannoy that calls his name. And that is literally what happened in that moment. He got fined then, in the real life, the prisoner got fined for not responding to the tannoy announcement to my name and reporting where he should have been. So there's that moment, it's like literally, you cannot, if you're a deaf prisoner, you cannot hear when the tannoy system calls out your name. So there's those things were all collated through my research process. And I think as well, for Reunion being about institutions as well and how they treat deaf people, and thinking about, I mean, if you think about any institution, the first one you're in is your family. It shapes your identity as a deaf person. So from your family, then go into the school system, then you're moving into the workplace. And then prison, of course, is the most extreme example of an institution you could find oneself in. So, yeah, I guess that's my research and my approach.
Yeah.
Go on.
I mean, all I was going to say is that I just had the most amount of conversations, communication with as many deaf people as I could. We talked to everyone on a raft of deaf productions that had gone before. We just wanted to gain an understanding of how it could all work and stuff like that. And then everyone in that process, Sam, who was our first AD, a shadow first AD, worked alongside with Alex, and that was an amazing pairing. And Sam was incredible, and just to give us a sense of again how it would all work. But primarily, it was having a lot of conversations with what had happened, what had gone before, and then talking to the crew members who were coming on about their experience. How could it be better? What can we do better? You know, and again, the interpreters came up a lot, making sure there's an interpreter at all times. And you see, just to add to what Billy was saying earlier, you see Brennan in prison in episode 1, but there are other examples of it in the show that I think Billy's written really beautifully about the horror of what you would have to do if you didn't understand what a medical professional was telling you. You know, because there's no interpreter. These are life-changing moments that deaf people don't have someone to advocate for them, someone to communicate for them, or with them, yeah.
And then just before we finish, Charlotte Arrowsmith has asked, is the inclusion of more deaf creatives a lasting industry shift or just a trend? And how do you plan to sustain it? Mark, I'm going to go to you.
Okay. I mean,
Producer.
I mean, look, we're working with Billy on a couple of other projects, which we can't talk about right now, but they're exciting, and I think what a learning curve for me and my team at Warp, who did not just the team at Warp but the whole crew, I think it's that thing. Have those conversations early, halfway through the shoot. You speak to people and go, "What are we doing wrong?" There were days that we made mistakes, and for us, we asked people, and we might, like, especially when you have a lot of extras. It's quite manic, and sometimes things get missed. But then we made sure that we asked the people. A lot of the deaf crew were like, "How could we improve?" And we did improve. And I think the next time we do it, and we will do it, will be even better.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Well, please join me in giving a...
One just thing to add to that, I'm talking about deaf creatives as well, but I'm so happy to be continued so that I'm going to work with you, and I'm really excited for what's coming next. And it's not only me either. I'm hoping, that I am opening doors, so it is sustainable, and all of you guys get to come through it too. It's not just about me and this. It's about opening doors for other people to walk through, to come through into the system. I will wedge it open for you. Keep on coming in. Thank you. Thank you so much for watching tonight.
Thank you. Thank you very much to Billy, Mark and Luke.